wards. Um, and what? Yeah. So just to review today, really. And I thought maybe the first thing that wouldn't hurt to do is just to look at the format of the exam. So I'll just pull up the previous midterm here. If you'll give me a moment. Okay, and back to you, and now present a window. There we go. So this is what the midterm looked like. Clearly, it will be different this time for you because you won't be taking it in a classroom. But my plan is to actually have you do it in the window. So it's over and done with. So when you do it, you'll do it, and it's done, and you'll be free. And so toward that end, it'll be all on Moodle. And what? And right. And so the format then being again several, probably 8 again, short response questions. And if you remember, doing these in 2 or 3 sentences, 1 to 3 sentences, right, is best. But be specific in your answers. Don't be tautological in your answers, right? So as an example of tautology, how does the sociological understanding of culture differ from the traditional anthropological view? If you said something like the sociological understanding uses the precepts of sociology, while anthropologists use an anthropological vision, that those are sentences, but that does not really answer the question, right? So you have to be specific, define your terms, and that's mostly what these, as you see, what these short responses are about. Is either defining your terms or giving a bit of the apparatus of the theories, but some of the stuff in here as well is just I don't want to call them gotcha questions, but they're just sort of to why the pedagogical role of such questions is to push you to do the studying and to really have the familiarity with the material. So you do have to attain some degree of specificity in your familiarity with the materials, right? With the readings in presentations, etc. And it is I'm going to really with this class. It's kind of funny because I'll definitely be focusing on the material since the midterm, but especially in terms of things like different kinds of reflection theories, or the cultural diamond and our understanding of cultural objects. I mean, that's all kind of by its nature cumulative, right? So it's like we can't I can't draw a hard line there. I would say certainly, especially review the Griswold that came prior to the midterm. I won't be asking though these going back here these kind of specific questions about articles from before the midterm, right? So I wouldn't ask you what a structural fold is again. I'll be asking stuff, about things from March 30th onward, right? And so that is the for me, the cutoff day. There's one, the Tanner and Asbridge article, was after the midterm, but it really kind of goes with the material from before the midterm. Of course, excuse me. Of course, with your essays, everything is fair game for you. Again, I will be asking questions that focus on material since the midterm, but if you want to, just for your own writing, go back and use examples. Excuse me. Use examples from texts that we read before the midterm. That's perfectly okay. But I just would say, just use stuff you've read for the class. And again, right, so I'm gonna it'll be longer. I should mention that, right? I'm gonna ask you to write 2 essays instead of just the one, because we're gonna be in a 90-minute time slot. I don't know if any of you have. I'll double check. I don't remember any of you having testing accommodations, but I will double check that, and you'll get extra time if that is the case. But yeah, otherwise it'll be, instead of 1 out of 2 essays, it'll be 2 out of 3 essays. And what, again, the thing with these, and I think I probably mentioned it 2 months ago, make sure that you answer all parts of the essay prompt, right? So here it's, so Griswold does this reflection theories. What is reflecting what? Answer that question. What major theories could be considered advocate? Answer that question. And probably answer each question in a paragraph. And then to say, where I ask, how are different reflection theories applied to cultural objects, right? The thing to do with that is to, describe that in the abstract, but then give, specific examples. So with that, something like the Lowenthal on literature was an appropriate example. So to describe it in the abstract, say, people apply reflection theory, to literature, this, that, the other thing, to say that, the cultural object, reflects the material relations of society, blah, blah, blah. For example, Lowenthal wrote that such and such and such, right? So do give examples, and really, that's kind of what sets the A's apart from the B essays with these kinds of things. And then, another question, right? Make sure, just again, answer all parts of the prompt. You'll have the 3-hour window there. So I would strongly suggest, writing at least a cursory outline before you get into this, to make sure that you're addressing each question within the essay prompt. And read what you have written. Right, read what you have written, and then go back and reread the prompt to make sure that you did everything that was asked, because it is, in those pressured situations, it's a little, it can be kind of easy to miss something along the way, or to forget where you are. So just take your time, relax. You'll have, again, the 3-hour window to do this stuff. Okay, and then so just to give you an idea of format, I mean, it'll be on Moodle. Have you taken tests on Moodle yet? No. Okay. It's some of you have seen something similar in homeworks that I've given in other classes. It's set up as a quiz in the rubric of Moodle. And what it will be is a question and then a text box for each answer. And I would suggest, and you may not be, I'll try as much as possible to like make it clear like where the short answers end and where the essays begin, that sort of thing. But you know, it won't look like what you've seen. Won't look like the previous midterm, right? It'll be all online. And the thing that I've found some students doing, which is probably not a bad idea, is especially especially like Sophia, if you're having connectivity issues, probably strongly suggest that at least for the essay questions, you know, you can write the essay, you know, in Word or something that's on your computer, and then copy and paste into the Moodle, just so that you're sure you don't lose that if your internet goes down or something along those lines, because that would suck, right? Yeah, I've seen a few students were doing that in my social problems class, and it seems to make a good deal of sense. Of course, this is all open book, open notebook. But you know, as I think you know, you found you know, on the midterm, you have to have your studying done in advance, right? So you have to know what you're looking for. You have to, you know what, you know, for example, the structural fold thing, right? If you hadn't gone back and reviewed the articles, you wouldn't know what that was referencing, and you don't want to be in that situation where now you're just flipping through tons and tons of paper to try to figure out what the hell that is talking about. So do spend time between now and, is it Monday? It is Monday. Yes, Monday at 11:30. Do spend time between now and Monday, you know, reviewing, getting your notes in order. If there are gaps in your notes, you know, fill that in. If you don't have notes on one of the papers, you know, maybe just take the abstract or something. Have a look at it. Of course, almost all, I think I missed one or two recordings, but almost all the class sessions are recorded online. And you know, also, you know, do you know that you can speed up YouTube videos, right? So always a good idea with spoken YouTube stuff, whatever. You know, you can speed right through there and get all over the ahs and the ums and the pauses and whatnot. But you know, that, and also the notes that you guys have been providing to each other are posted in those forums for your review, and for a number of classes, right, we have the whiteboards as well, which also, you know, I do suggest you look at that stuff, because some of the things that I've been discussing that you might want to put into essays, you know, really aren't too clearly laid out in any of the articles. You know, especially those points about culture and cognition. You know, there's the one article that references that with respect to DiMaggio, but not much else. And again, I wouldn't necessarily. I'm not gonna ask you short answer questions about things that aren't in the readings, but they could be useful examples to work through in the essays, right? You want to have as many tools available to you as you can. So again, open book, open notebook, but that definitely means you have to be prepared as well, right? So do the studying, and then have your materials as organized as you can, so you can find it when you need it. Again, though, not to freak you out, because you do have a full 3 hours, and I wouldn't anticipate even, I would anticipate with 2 essays instead of 1, the average student would probably take a maximum of 90 minutes with the exam as I'm preparing it. So you should have ample time to be able to go back and do things. And do your best, right? Okay, so I'm going to stop presenting that window now. I'm going to present a whiteboard. Okay. There we go. And just now to go through a bit the specifics, the details of some of this material, just to jog your memory and make sure we're all kind of on the same page with this. So, and I don't know how explicit I've been with this, but you can think of the Griswold chapters as kind of headers or preambles to different units in the course. So we started off after the before times, in the quarantine times, we started off with identities, problems, and movements. And in general, a few things about that. Just remember, identities are collective. Identities are, in a sense, invented, right? So if we go back to, and actually, it's interesting. There's always links across things. So I tend to think of the Zabruski in this sense, as well as the power sense here, right? So the Polish. If you remember that article on Polish traditions and the Black Madonna and all that sort of stuff, right? That's actually a pretty good example of this invented collective identity, invented traditions, etc. Right? And then Griswold makes this particular connection, although I would, again, the caveat is, I guess I'll put it here. She says basically, and this is a pretty abstract paraphrase, but that identities lead to how people have a sense of what social problems are, and again, that's right for a number of things. So certainly. In that Jacobs article about American Indians, clearly the as Native Americans, as seeing their reception as Indians as a problem depends on that particular construction of that identity, but I'd also just hesitate again to say, well, there's some problems like coronavirus that maybe don't tap in so much to a collective identity, but the more specific points about problems are that problems are, again, a social construct. And I know I've had a couple of you in social problems before. So this is kind of this basic stuff about social problems. So it's these social problems are constructed, right? We didn't go a whole lot into that, but you see a little bit of it in the Rossino and Danaher article, where they're kind of talking about, what are the problems, what's wrong with working in a mill, and you see how the musicians kind of specifically construct problems by making references to families or to the brown lung or to different things like that, right? So it's not just the problems aren't just given out there in the world. And an important point here as well to remember is that they're mediated in particular in the very specific sense that the media presents them to people, or I should say the media present them to people. So and here we're talking kind of specifically about news cycles, right? It's interesting to watch right now. Again, we're paying attention to almost nothing. Excuse me. We're paying attention to almost nothing but the coronavirus these days, and so the news is really, there's this kind of secondary problem of employment and the economy, which gets and with some of this stuff, it's like literally, you look at a newspaper or you look at the front page of a news source like Politico or something like that. So 90% of the stuff is devoted to coronavirus, and then there's and the economy sucks. And then there's some guy in Los Angeles fucked a chicken. You're like, whoa, that seems like a problem. Like, why aren't we paying attention to that? That didn't actually happen. I'm sorry, that's a terrible example from my head. But if we didn't have coronavirus, that would be big news, right? So this is just to bear in mind that the media really, just in terms of the artifacts that they produce, the cultural object of a newspaper or a website, really only has so much space to pay attention to a limited number of problems. And then with movements, these are more dependent on collective identities, usually, nowadays especially. And so especially, and I kind of talked about this a bit with you guys, the whole class in itself, class for itself sort of a thing. It's like you have to, if you want to have useful strike actions, you need to have a sort of a collective identity of workers, have this in people's heads that we're all similar and we're all in this together, right? And so that's an important part, for example, of what the musicians did in textile producing country in the South during the Great Depression, right? They kind of said, hey, look, all y'all have this similar problem, and I know you've been living in this, backwater town in West Virginia, and you think that your problems might be just your own local problems, but the radio could sort of show you that no, people all over are having these similar problems, and you share and identity. And once people get that sense of sharing an identity, then they potentially recognize that they could act in concert to solve some of their problems, right? And then with framing, you may recall this is about kind of the idea that the message matters, or even a bit more specifically, like how you put the message matters. And so, the go-to example here is always, for me, the abortion debates, right? And so you're either pro-life or you're pro-choice, but you're not anti-life or anti-choice, right? That's not how movements frame themselves. They tend to put some positivity on this. And then I don't think we got too much into this, but we'll see a little bit maybe in like in Schilt. Essentially, framing is the a key problem there in the Schilt and Westbrook article of like, how do you understand trans people, right? Do you frame them as, and then you can kind of see there's that whole different array of framings that they discussed. So remember, the focus on in Schilt and Westbrook is on trans people, and a couple of different things, but really, a way to kind of remember the main points of the article, I would say, probably framing is a good way to think about it. And you'll recall that, there is a frame, especially for trans men, the framing being, sort of uber masculine, so the coworkers who are like, okay, if you're gonna be a dude, like, we're gonna make you like 100% masculine, and we're gonna expect you to like want to lift heavy things and tell like bad sex jokes and that kind of thing, as opposed to the trickster frame. I don't think they put it in those terms. I forget what word they used exactly, but the idea of the trickster, being that if you're a trans man, you're not really a man, and this goes to other points they're making about like genital essentialism, that sort of thing. But this is that different frame, different way of understanding this identity. And of course, remember that a lot of that article is just about identity in general, sort of how people navigate those different new identities. Similar thing going on in Jacobs and Marola. So remember, this is about Native American identities. And what? Oh, right. And the interface with structure. And this is, again, kind of why I'm saying, like, the focus here is clearly on materials into the midterm, but the old stuff's always coming back, right? So the problem here being, or a problem here being, that the available identities or the identities available to Native Americans without tribal certification, are really, in a sense, a reflection of the governmental structure. So, if you'll recall, the government doesn't want there to be any more Indians than there officially are, because they don't want to owe more resources to more people. And so, there is that structure, which then comes out as the culture of these people aren't real Indians, right? We see plenty of examples of that through the line, and that of course comes back in this final unit we just did on culture and power, right? So the structure of the political power structures, the economic power structures, strongly influence what kind of cultural objects we can have, we can see, and as Jacobs and Arola point out, what kind of people we can be. Ehrman, is the music and movement stuff, and a few, kind of key things throughout here. And by the way, I'm probably, I'll be missing certainly plenty of details as we go along, because this is, just a sort of a quick and dirty review. But, as you have any questions, issues, if I'm missing anything you think is important, please don't hesitate to chime in. With Ehrman, though, remember, he kind of took this curious rhetorical tack, I guess you could say, of looking at two very different movements. So the civil rights movement in the U.S. and white supremacists in Scandinavia. Sorry, what my crazy mind always goes back to with this article. You probably don't remember. Do you remember? Did you guys watch Chappelle's show? Totally out of okay. You should go back and watch Dave Chappelle's old sketch comedy show, and Martin Bigsby, the black white supremacist. Right. That's this. I get the mixing goes on in my head here. But that's, of course, not what this article is about. This article is about, it's the African American civil rights movement in the U.S. and, of course, specifically music like We Shall Overcome. And then the white supremacists used like Nazi stuff. I shouldn't say, not specifically Nazi songs, but like punk music about Nazis and Nazi stuff and racial pride and all that sick stuff. And the takeaway, for me anyway, from this, is really the power of music to form collective identities. And to structure experience. So whether that's singing "We Will Overcome, We Shall Overcome," on the bridge in Selma, or dancing the pogo with Nazis. People who do those things, feel more connected to the other people in their social movement. Then with Rocinio, boy, that's a complicated name, Rocinio and Danaher. This was with the textile workers and music in the Great Depression. You know, and overall, the point here is media's role in collective action. That in those towns that had radio stations, where these, you know, I want to call them traveling minstrels, would pass through, right? These proto country artists would pass through and sing these songs on the radio about resistance and about the problems of textile mills. You know, those were the places that were more likely to see activity. So really kind of a focused study of the power of music to engender collective action or to craft collective identities. And then we moved on for movements and identities to organizations. And, you know, a couple of different ways of thinking about this. You know, internal culture of organizations. You know, and well, again, you know, I don't know how much want or need to know about this stuff at this point, but if you recall, one of the last articles we read, like the Goldberg and Hannon article, right, was more actually about the second point here. The second point being, you know, that well, there is an external culture in which every organization exists, or external culture or cultures, right? Because, you know, as we saw, especially in that Mizrachi piece, you know, an organization often in a globalized world, in a multinational world, has to interface with different cultures, right? Because their operations are in different cultures. So you have to be aware of those different external cultures. Oh yeah, the sort of the meta point, the pragmatic point here being that those guys, Goldberg and Hannon, and I think Kovac, are all, I mean, they're sociologists, but they work in business schools. And there is, you know, quite a lot of that, and really, I would say, often, not always, but often the job of sociologists when they're in business schools is to address questions of culture. And the sort of the older tradition is this one, is this point about the internal culture of a firm, you know, and it sort of boils down to HR issues, right? How do you motivate workers? How do you form that sense? I didn't show you. I should have showed you at some point. There's an old video of IBM workers singing the IBM songbook. You know, this is a long-standing tech firm, right? But firms do all this stuff to try to build up an internal culture, to try to make people feel that they're part of the team, all that team building stuff that firms do, right? That's you know, a sociological issue. And then, but right, so the external culture, but you know, also remember this, you know, so that on the one hand, we're focused on products. You know, how does the product translate in different cultural environments? Of course, the old example there is the Chevy Nova that they couldn't sell in Latin America because the name means that it doesn't go. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, though, as we saw, you know, again, in particular with the Mizrachi article, a global workforce is made of workers with very different attitudes. Well, attitudes in general, attitudes towards work in specific, and so that's really a lot of what that Mizrachi article was about, right? So maybe moving on, I'm going to skip for a second. I'll skip Hallett, get back to it, but Mizrachi et al. Here, remember, this is the case looking at Jordan and Israel. Their specific thing that they focus in on in that article is issues of trust. But I would say just more generally, workers' cultures. You can pull a lot of examples out of that article of things like the what would you call it, paternalism, right? Attitudes towards paternalism in especially in Jordan, and if you recall, the firm was using brothers and husbands to persuade their wives and sisters and daughters to work in this firm, which is something that Israelis, Americans would never do, right? We don't, it's like, can you imagine if your boss called your dad to ask to get you to work harder, to come into work on Saturday? It's just it's foreign to us, but clearly that is how things work in Jordan. And so again, the point being that organizations have to pay attention to the cultures that their workers are coming from. Hallett, if you'll remember the sort of the key metaphor here was samurais versus, I think I spelled that wrong, samurais versus shoot, I'm forgetting anybody want to help me? Samurais versus Sophia, this was your article. The other term was whatever the term was for accountants. This is going to.
Oh, that was my article. Samurai versus merchant. I didn't know what you were talking about. Yeah.
Thank you, Joelle. Okay. Samurais versus merchants. Good. And the point there being that samurais have a code of honor. Oh, I even flipped it, right? The samurais were the accountants, and the merchants sell shit. In over and above any code of honor, right? Almost without a code of honor. And again, that's the specific within Arthur Andersen, so that firm that got pulled down, or sort of pulled themselves down in the Enron scandal. But then also, and again, his broader point here is symbolic power. And the idea really that we give power to certain people. So at the one time they were giving power in the old days to the samurais, to the accountants. In Arthur Andersen later on, it became the merchants. But also, and that's mostly an internal dynamic, but also and this was sort of a quickly made point in the article, but an important one, is that symbolic power also comes because of relationships to outside social structures. So, for example, somebody who's gone to Harvard Business School is going to get more symbolic power, than somebody who went to the University of American Samoa or something like that, because there are these broader structures. Okay, and then Rivera, was just really kind of more on matching workers to internal cultures. But also, as Joel kind of drilled home, I think that's also tied to broader power structures. So, the richer, the whiter, the maler you are. Is that a word? It is now. Rich white males, tend to have the places in the structure that give them access to the cultural stuff that makes you more apt to work at like a big five accounting firm or something like that. So this goes back to, if you'll recall, my favorite example in that article is squash, the game, not the food, right? And squash being one of those games that only, well, it seemed to me when I used to go to a school that had squash courts that the only people who played squash are rich white men. I don't know if that's totally fair across the board, but it sure seems that way. Ed Lauman, who you may remember, he's a big sexuality sociologist. Ed Lauman used to enjoy a good game of squash now and then. Oh, Ed's a character. Sorry. All right, moving on now. Okay, well, this is a little ambiguous. Culture and connection. And really, it's this is about ICT, right? Information communications technology. And I dealt this a bit. This I think probably suffered more than other units because of the COVID, the quarantine. But I would say that the biggest emphasis here is on social media, and really on its ability, the double-edged sword of its ability to connect some people, but at the same time, divide. Oops. Divide. Oh, sorry, there's something stuck in my stylus, and so it's misbehaving. I'm going to try to fix that. That should be better. Oh, no. Scratched up my book. Okay, sorry. Social media. It's able to both connect and divide people. So connect people in terms of whatever it is. You're a cancer survivor, but you live in a small town in Iowa, well, go online and find there's a subreddit for that, or there's a Facebook group for that, and it can bring people from all over the world to sing kumbaya together, and it'd be a wonderful thing. Or and really, I think I kind of maybe overhammered this point, but I don't think we, I almost feel like you can't overemphasize this point. What we're increasingly finding is that social media tears apart the fabric of society, right? Instead of uniting people, it does unite people, but it unites like people into little silos, right? So like my wife's Uncle Leroy, right, on Facebook, man, it's like he just becomes more and more of a crazy, like he's not quite a white supremacist yet, right? But he just becomes more and more of a kind of crazy Trump guy. And right, so that power divide, and that's I think particularly seen in the Hawden et al. Article, right, about online extremism. Really, I mean, just in the most abstract, just this idea that people can, and younger, maler people tend to find themselves getting exposed to online extremism, right, and that these are frequently people who we wouldn't even necessarily have gone in that direction, right? But the internet enables this radical, horrible culture. Mark Maron calls it the army of unfuckable hate nerds, right? I don't know if I've mentioned that to you yet. Yeah, right. That's a thing that didn't exist before this information communications technology. Of course, there's other stuff in the Hawden, which I'm not quite sure how you might use it, but there is this other stuff there about sort of the progression that one makes, through communities, almost the career that you have in communities. It's almost a callback to Howard Becker's stuff on marijuana and deviant communities, and deviance as a learned thing. Okay, and then finally, what we spent the last couple weeks on here, issues of culture and power, and again, this speaks to collective memory issues. This speaks to propaganda and the media. And of course, money, it's an end, money. That those with the power to control the media, those with the money to control the media, can control the message. Can control how people understand events, can even call upon people to take up arms and things. And of course, you'll recall over the past couple of weeks, how I've been kind of harping on these anti-lockdown protesters, right? And there's some real question there. The more I read about it, there is a question: is how organic is this really? Or how much is it a question of power? Meaning, are there certain groups or individuals with a lot of money, feeding a propaganda machine to get people in these protests? Quick aside: I did notice today, like something I've been hoping for years. A group of black people with AK-47s went to the state house in Michigan with a black state senator to kind of as a counterweight, as a sort of a counter message to the lockdown protesters were there. Which is really, and so this is all kind of a long-winded aside toward the idea that I might throw at you as a potential essay question. Some like contemporary news article, to say like, okay, so analyze this, article about the lockdown protests or whatever, in terms of the theory that we've been using in the course, right? So how do articles by Jacobs and Goldberg and Lizardo and whoever help us to understand why are people like this, right? Or how does a movement come together? Or it could be something less fraught and more fun, but I'm not guaranteeing that, because it really kind of depends on what's out there. But there is a good chance, right, that I'll ask you to sort of directly apply theory to a current event. Okay, quickly, Zabriskie, Polish stuff, but really, focus in on the contestation over different narratives about what being Polish is. You recall that's all about, in a first sense, the idea that Poland is a martyr state, but then later the question over what Poland's role in the Holocaust was, and how much they should be understood as a sort of ethno-religious state. And there's real contestation over that. Jacobs was the LA riots. And what that showed us especially was the power of narrative. And even if we don't, if we do or don't agree with his kind of breakdown of the genre balance of romance and tragedy, the bigger picture message from that, certainly, that the way we tell stories about cultural events affects perceptions, affects how we respond to those events. That's incredibly important. That's almost a sort of an orthodoxy within the social culture, within sociology of movements. Goldberg, right? And then right, the second pair of articles here, Goldberg and Lizardo are both about the omnivore univore distinction, and again, and this is again, you can go back. There's a whiteboard on this where I kind of try to lay out the article, or the argument that basically people use culture to express power relations, and use fairly mundane aspects of culture, like what was it? Yelp reviews, right? Restaurants, the kind of food you eat talks, speaks to, is representative of how powerful a person you are in society, that kind of thing. And Lizardo is more focused on music, right? Okay, so that's all the time. That's a lot. That's a whole half of a semester in an hour. Okay. Thank you guys. It's been a real pleasure working with you all. I know. Thank you for bearing with us in these weird times. Stress up like plague doctors. Oh my God. Yes. Well, I hope to see you all. I plan to see you all in the fall or in December at this funny is maybe it'll be a spaced out convocation. I don't know. I don't know what it'll be, but we'll do something. We'll meet again in better times. Okay. If you have questions before or during the midterm, just shoot some emails at me. Otherwise, study hard, enjoy your summers, and yeah, we'll get through this. Okay. Bye bye.
Did you want to talk about my independent study at all?
I don't think we really have anything to talk about, do we?
I don't know if you wanted to like do a final little review or like talk about how, I don't know.
I that sounds like a good idea. I have your paper yet though, so I don't really know where you're at with that. Wait, let me stop recording. This is recording.